Hi, it's Shane with Yes to Jesus Ministries, and today I just want to bring you a word from 1 Samuel. It's through a few chapters, 16, 17, 18 are kind of the main ones, but we have David here who's been anointed king, even though he's not appointed just yet. Saul is still king. The Spirit of the Lord has departed from him. Now it's resting on David. And so David has actually been called to play the harp for Saul to soothe him. And there's an interesting note in 16:21, 1 Samuel 16:21, that he became his armor bearer. If you think about this, being a young boy, maybe middle class or poor, as David likely was, to be able to take care of the king's armor, to kind of be in charge of that. Maybe you're helping him put it on. I mean, this would have been the finest, the strongest, probably the most ornate armor in all of Israel. But you can imagine every little boy is probably dreaming about being a valiant warrior. And David certainly was one. I'm sure that was in his heart. But I'd like to suggest to you that he didn't allow that to overtake his heart. His heart was still for the Lord, which is why he had been anointed, right? If we look later, you'll see that he goes on to fight Goliath, and he convinces Saul to let him go out and fight. And it's so cool what he says to him. He's like, listen, I fought the lion and the bear. He said, when they attacked, I chased after them and grabbed them by the beard. Like, he didn't just run them off. He grabbed them by what I believe symbolically means like the center of their power. And God delivered him, and he knew it was the Lord. The Lord was training him to be a mighty warrior, and even for this moment. And I would say that this is a good example of someone seeking first the kingdom of God. He wasn't regarding his own life. He was confident in defending the nation of Israel from this vile Philistine that was blaspheming every day. He wasn't going to stand for that. He knew God had brought him to this moment, and he was stepping into that. But look at Saul's approach. Saul, naturally, logically, by the flesh, it's like, well, here's the best armor Israel has. This is the king's armor. Put this on if you're going to go out there. So David acquiesces. But you see, it didn't overtake David's heart. David wasn't sitting there going, oh, I wondered if I would ever have this moment. I thought it would never, ever happen that I would get to wear the king's armor in battle. But he didn't do that. He said, you know what? I haven't tested this. The Lord has shown me what to do. The Lord has shown me how he partners with me for victory, and I'm going to stick with that. And so he puts on his shepherd's bag and goes and gets the 5 smooth stones, and he goes with a sling. He doesn't even take a sword, which probably would have seemed just radical and crazy to everyone around him, and yet Saul let him go out like that for a one-on-one for the whole country. Like if he lost, Israel becomes the slaves of the Philistines. And so he goes out with his shepherd gear. Of course, he bears that first stone in Goliath's forehead. And the Lord did provide what he needed. He stepped into his calling and what he was supposed to do in that moment, even though that would seem like an impossible task. And then he actually grabbed a sword. He took Goliath's sword out of his sheath. He didn't even have time to take that out. He takes his head. And then later, I believe it's 1754, there's an interesting note. It says they took the head of Goliath to Jerusalem. And of course, they would have paraded this around and celebrated. And not only that, now the Philistines are their slaves. I mean, this would have been huge, right? You see, David wasn't seeking the armor. He wasn't seeking the glory. He wasn't seeking what the world could provide. He sought the Lord. He had private victories with the Lord, which became very public. But the note as well is that he took Saul's armor. He took Goliath's armor and put it in his tent. And so, if that weren't enough, if you look on down in 18:4, you'll see Jonathan, I believe acknowledging him really as the true heir of the throne of Israel. Jonathan actually disrobes. He takes off his robe and he puts it on David, and he puts his armor on him, and he gives him his bow, and he gives him his sword. I like to suggest this is almost as if he said, David, you're everything that I can never be. He was acknowledging him, I would suggest, as the true heir to the throne, knowing that this was coming. So not only did David reject the armor of the world, of the king, and do it the way God had showed him, then God blessed him afterwards. He ended up with 2 sets of armor. And, I don't know what David was going to do with the Philistines' armor. Jonathan's would have fit. So he actually ended up with a set that would work for him. And so we know later, I believe it's chapter 21, that at least the sword was in the temple with Ahimelech. And here David comes. He was just looking for bread, and he gave it to him, but he said, hey, do you have a sword? I don't have one. He said, yeah, Goliath's sword's here. You know what that sword was? It's behind the ephod. God provided everything he needed. Even though it wasn't pretty, even though he wasn't instantly sitting on the throne in Jerusalem after being anointed, he took him on a journey to prepare him to be a great king. And that started with rejecting the king's armor and stepping into the purpose that the Lord had for him in the manner that the Lord showed him. May this bless you and encourage you.